Have you heard? I've got a new thing. The Jay Brown Yoga Weekly Teachers Class. It starts August 2nd, and I'm really excited about it because it's an opportunity for me to interact with many of you around the world in a more personal and face-to-face way. A weekly online teachers class subscription where we can inquire and learn and support teaching. I beta tested it with some of you and was amazed by the depth of the discussions and the ability for us to work together as if we were in the same room despite the obstacle of distance. We've priced it to give the most possible value for the cost, and we're kicking it off with an introductory rate. The Jay Brown Yoga Weekly Teachers Class. It starts August 2nd. You can reserve a spot at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, this is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. And if you're new around here, let me welcome you. If you've been here before and you are returning, what's up? How's everybody doing? I am coming to you from the road in Vancouver, Washington. I'm sitting in my sister's backyard, and I'm listening to the sound of a little waterfall that runs into a koi pond. It's quite lovely. And I have just stolen away from my family who are inside preparing dinner, and I've come out here to have this moment with you. If you've been listening along, you know I've been out and about. First, I was in Montana at the Feathered Pipe, and then for the last week, I've been on a family road trip. It's been quite wonderful, swimming in lakes and walking windy shorelines. Today I was in Portland, and it's been a great trip. Just getting away from your usual thing, seeing places you haven't seen before, being with family and friends you haven't seen in a long time. It's been very good for my soul. I know that my daughters and my wife have had a really great time as well. But we are going home tomorrow. And boy, is there a lot of stuff waiting for me there. Yeah, I'm not complaining. I'm glad to have stuff. But it feels like, oh my gosh. I looked at my schedule for next week and I was like, oh, fuck. It's good. It's good. I guess that's what happens. You know, you get away and you relax and you're not having to be on top of all your responsibilities and stuff. And then at some point, you do have to pick that all back up again, put it on your shoulders, right? So I think I'm ready. I've had a good time away, a good bit of walkabout. Although it's not really like walkabout like it used to be. When I was younger, before I had a wife and children, and I went on walkabout, like traveled to places, and it's not quite the same thing as when you got kids. You got to plan a lot more, you know? You end up spending a lot more money. But I'm kidding, really. I'm glad that we did this, and it's been fun to have you along the ride. I got some lovely emails from you folks after last week. I'm okay. I know I was very tired in the outro, but I'm fine. I was just late and tired. In fact, I feel quite restored and refreshed and ready as I'm going to be to carry forth. So, anyways, I'll be back in Pennsylvania tomorrow. It was sweet while it lasted. But good news is we've got an awesome podcast to listen to today. I'm talking with Faith Hunter. And I had never met her before, but it turned out that we had all kinds of parallels and mutual friends, and it amounted to a very fun conversation. I'm psyched for you to get to listen to it today. Before we do, let me mention that this episode of Yoga Talks is sponsored by yogalifestyle.com. And this is the place that I got all of my yoga-related supplies, mats and blocks and bolsters and books and all the stuff that you might need to help support your practice and study of yoga. This is where I was getting all my stuff when I had a center for 10 years in Brooklyn. I know the owner personally, Ray Greenberg. He's been on the podcast. I encourage you to go back and listen to the episode. He talks all about how the company came about. And I'm glad that he's a sponsor. You know, he's got some very unique and interesting items, including the Becca Long Life mats, which is my favorite mat, the ones that I used at my center. He's also got this teardrop bolster that he sent me that I've been laying on. And I just appreciate that you get to deal with Ray directly. It's independently owned and operated. And, you know, it's yogis supporting yogis. So go check it out at yogalifestyle.com. This episode of Yoga Talks is also sponsored by Karmasoft, which is another company I am very well familiar with. I used Karmasoft when I had my yoga center to run all my studio management needs, and it's by far superior to Mindbody Online. If you or someone you know is a yoga, Pilates, or fitness center owner, manager, or teacher, the work of scheduling and class payments and accounting, it is all made far easier and more efficient by using Karmasoft. And Rudy Senecal, the owner of Karmasoft, has also been on this podcast, and you should go back and listen to that episode because we talk all about the company and what they're about and how they help grassroots yoga people. I highly recommend Karmasoft. Check it out at karmasoftonline.com. I also have a couple of gigs coming up. August 4th, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. August 10th through 12th, Falls Church, Virginia. August 26th in Rye, New York. You can find out about those gigs and more. You can listen to the archives of this podcast and read my blog and find out about my online yoga video stuff, including my new teacher's class, which starts this week, and my ongoing live stream subscription to all of my public classes, and my DVD and downloads and online workshop. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. I think I'm keeping it short and sweet this week because, like I said, I've got family in there. My daughters are actually looking at me through the sliding glass door and saying, "What's Daddy doing out there?" They might even walk out here any moment. So I will touch base with you on the other side, let you know who's coming on next week, because I have an exciting new series with people who are aligned with the tradition that I am most aligned with, the TKV Desa guitar tradition. Just gave you a little hint, but I will tell you more specifically on the other side who's coming up. In the meantime, let's get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Faith Hunter.
Hello.
Hello. Cool. How you doing?
I am wonderful.
Well, this is super fun. I mean, we've never met before, but we have like lots of mutual friends.
Yeah, I realized that.
And, you know, just to say, like, pretty much, and I don't know, maybe this is not the best place to start, but maybe we get to this later, but you've come up on the podcast a bunch of times. And,
are you serious?
Yeah, you've come up, and pretty much like every teacher of color who've ever come on this podcast has cited you as an inspiration.
Oh, snap. Oh, wow.
And that's probably because you had like some higher profile gigs, and you were somebody in the public eye to a lot of teachers who are coming up, and you were a big inspiration to them. So in any case, just to know that, and props to you, and great to get this chance to talk to you.
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank them. That's cool.
Well, you know, the other thing is I was getting ready to speak to you. And so I was like doing a little research, and I didn't really realize how much like we have paralleled quite a bit.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah. First of all, we're about the same age, I think. I'm 46, and I think you're somewhere in and around there. And I know it's okay because I saw you in a video admit your age. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done that.
Yes, you're exactly right. I'm 47.
Okay, so we're right in and around at the same time. And I didn't know that you really sort of first came into teaching at Laughing Lotus in New York City.
Yes. Oh my goodness. How are you connected to that?
Well, you see, I first started going to yoga classes at Jivamukti on 2nd Avenue in like 94, 95.
Oh
So
my God.
I remembered practicing next to Dana before she opened Laughing Lotus. And then I remember when it opened, and, that was only a couple years before you got there, maybe. They couldn't have been open that long. When you got there, I think I saw in your bio, it was like 2000, right?
Yes. And, the funny thing is I didn't start practicing there consistently until I decided to do their teacher training. So here's the crazy part. We probably ran into each other at Jivamukti on Lafayette Street.
Maybe. I went there a little bit, but when they made that move is sort of when I started to go a little bit in a different direction. I wasn't practicing there as much. I remember the new place. It had the waterfall, remember?
Yeah, it's so crazy. Yeah, because I moved to New York in 2000, and I bounced around a bit, but I lived on 11th between 1st and 2nd. And so
I was on 13th between 1st and 2nd.
Stop the press.
No, I was there. And here's the craziest thing to me that this is where I wanted to start it, because there is a sort of parallel, and it goes on from there. Not that we were just sort of in New York at the same time, but I kept thinking to myself, it's like, I'm the difference between us is I'm like this white boy from Los Angeles, and you're like a black girl from Louisiana.
Yeah.
What the fuck are we doing in New York becoming yoga teachers?
Right, exactly.
So how does that happen? So I know how it happened for me. And honestly, I did see a video of you talk about how it happened for you.
Yeah.
And I won't make you tell the whole story, but I want to talk about it some, because it's one of the things on the podcast that I'm always interested in, because I feel like everybody has a thing that is what I call their in to yoga. It's like the thing that roots them to it, and why they would decide to make it their life in the way that some people do.
Right.
And I know for me, it had to do with my mom's passing. And I know for you, it had to do with the illness in your family. Mm-hmm. Before we go there, just out of curiosity, was there any yoga in Louisiana when you were growing up? Because I'm trying to remember. I don't remember hearing about yoga really until I went to college. Do you remember hearing about yoga when you were a kid?
Not when I was super young. My only connection to yoga, probably say high school age / part of college, was Rodney Yee on PBS. That was it. That's what I thought yoga, and I remember my dad seeing it on PBS. I was in high school for sure. And my dad was he's like, you can totally do that stuff. Because I was a dancer. I grew up as a ballet dancer. And so my dad was like, oh, you can do that stuff. And so I think I tried it a couple of times, and then I was like, whatever. Mm-hmm. I was like, there are no oceans and waves here. It's hard for me to figure out how he's breathing, but I like the stretching anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so that's interesting. So you did get a little bit on PBS. It's funny. The generation before us, it was Lilias Folan on PBS, and then after Lilias was Rodney Yee. But a lot of people got exposed. They remember as a young kid seeing that on the TV.
Wow.
That was you. That was your first memory of it too.
That was my first memory. PBS, man. PBS is the bomb.
Yes. Well, I don't know how it is these days. I haven't watched a lot of PBS. I don't know if they've got any yoga on there. Probably not. But
probably not,
because it's everywhere else now. See, back then there was nowhere.
There was nowhere.
PBS.
They were so far ahead. They were definitely blazing the trail in that sense. Right,
but you didn't really get to yoga until a little bit later than that. And
definitely.
I got to say, I don't know. I heard you talk about your brother. I just watched it this morning, and it floored me. I was bawling. That's a serious bum deal you got handed there. Your brother got handed.
Yeah. It's the craziest thing, and it's really fascinating. In terms of my path to yoga. one of my friends was like, hey, you're going through this right now. Let's try out a yoga class. And I didn't know what the hell she was talking about. I was like, okay, whatever. And so we show up to this Kundalini yoga class and it wasn't called Kundalini. I didn't know until like probably almost 2 to 3 years later that it was actually Kundalini, because I ended up going to Boston and going, I'm going to do yoga. And then it wasn't the same. And I was like, this is weird, because I was so used to doing Kundalini. And it was a Hatha class that I had taken and I thought was odd. But stepping into that class and, I was in graduate school. So I was in my 20s. I had already graduated from college. I'm in grad school. My brother is literally in the hospital dying from AIDS. My parents are traveling back and forth in Louisiana because they don't live in New Orleans. And so they were going back and forth, one weekend, another day, my parents. And on those moments when my parents needed a break, I was there in the hospital with my brother. And so it was stressful, but heartbreaking. And then at the same time, I'd never, ever been so close to him other than those moments. Like it was kind of like being in a yoga class, right? And you're practicing and it's like, okay, I'm going to drop into the breath. I'm going to get in my body. And then all of a sudden you hit that moment where you're like, oh yeah, this is it. This is the sweetness, this is the bliss spot. This is the love I have for myself. This is how I need to show up, or the teacher's saying something and you're like crying. Though that was what I experienced with my brother, was like those moments were like, yay, we're laughing and, we're remembering, childhood. And then there are other moments where we're walking down the hall because he just needed to get out of his room and we're just staring out at the window, just holding hands, and like, I'm just like dying, I'm crying literally because I'm like, my brother's dying and these are the last moments, However, at the same time, it was like, I would never change this moment.
Wow. Well, I mean, my mom passed when I was 16, so I didn't really deal with it until later, till about the age you were, in my early 20s. And I guess the part of the story that I feel like got me the most is that, like, my mom, she had cancer and then she had leukemia, and that just seemed like a random thing. But the way that your brother got AIDS, it's like you hear about that. You hear about that time when nobody knew about AIDS yet, and they weren't checking the blood for the blood transfusions yet.
Yep.
And then people got AIDS from blood, just not through no fault of their own.
No fault of their own, and thinking, it's like, and a lot of people, some people may know like my full scope of my story, but both of my brothers were infected. So not only my older brother who passed and kind of like that took me into that path of yoga, but my younger brother, who was 4 years younger than me, was also infected from the same batch of blood products. And so our family, growing up, we were like dealing with a lot. And I always tell some of my friends, I was like, oh, I was always as a kid, I was always trying to be the good girl. Because I always felt like my parents were like just so bogged down, and I wasn't processing it as I was trying to be the good girl. I was just trying not to cause too much trouble, Well,
I know it changed my life, because having that kind of difficulty or tragedy and ultimately death, although I know your brother didn't pass till later, at that time, like, I always remember saying to somebody, hey, when your mom's in the hospital, you don't worry about stupid shit. Like like my friends were like worrying about stuff that I just didn't seem important, It's like, it forces you to sort of have to be less superficial or real about life. There's just like, this is death happening and shit. So you can't, so I don't know, that shaped me, and it seems like it shaped you. I also think it's interesting. I noticed, and it's a rarity, but your degrees were in business, right? You got business degrees. Yoga teachers don't normally know how to do any business stuff, and that could explain that you made some smart choices along the way or something,
Yeah.
Yes.
And the thing is that I grew up as a creator. I grew up as a ballet dancer. I played piano and played clarinet at one point in my life. So creating was always like a part of me. So when I was like, I'm going to go to college, what am I going to major in? I was like, yeah, I'm not really interested in doing dance. Like, because everybody thought I was going to be a dance major because I was like really into it. And I was like, no, I think I'm going to try my hand at marketing. Just totally random. And went into that. I loved it. And then when I decided to get my MBA, I was influenced by one of my marketing professors. And I worked for him for a while, for one summer, and just being there in his office and seeing that creation happens in different forms, and understanding that our world that we're moving into is going to constantly shift and change. I was like, wow, I'm going to have to grow up at some point. So maybe I'll go and get my MBA so I have that. And then also, too, I mean, I come from a family of educated people. So my parents were like, well, you need to figure out what you're going to do after college. Are you going to go get a job or are you going to go to grad school? And I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to go to grad school. And then I ended up doing that. And moving into doing grad school, this is the other part about it, is that I was so impacted by the HIV/AIDS epidemic that while I was in grad school, my second year, I decided to go and work for the Louisiana Health Department and utilize my social marketing skills and at that time, social marketing was not like what we call social marketing. It was like social behavior.
Yeah, no, there wasn't any social media. So
there was no social media. So social marketing was social behavior. And so using other social platforms like television or ads and, other, traditional forms of media to help change behavior and change culture and around sexual health. And so I did that my second year in grad school, and then after I graduated, then I spent probably another 6 years doing that either in DC when I finally moved to the East Coast. I did that in DC for a while, and then when I moved to New York, I ended up continuing that as a consultant because I was like, I can't make money as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Fall back on my skills,
But it's interesting because you were doing marketing, but you were doing marketing for like an AIDS organization. So you weren't, that's interesting. That's not the same thing as doing marketing for some extractive corporation or something.
No.
Yeah.
And I actually, it's so funny. At one point in time, I remember, you talk about choices, and I haven't really said this like to real people. I've said it to my friends, not that they're not real people, but people that know me really well know this story, is that at one point in time when I was living in DC, I had the option at 2 interviews. I had an interview with the National Minority AIDS Council, and then I had, at the same exact time, I had an interview with Nike. And I was flown first to New Jersey, had an interview in New Jersey, and then they flew me all the way out to Oregon, went to, their gigantic, huge, Nike center there, did the interview there, and I was offered a job for both.
Wow, that was a crossroads.
Serious. And I was like, the funny part about it came back to culture. And it came back to culture and impact. And
what do you mean by that? What does that culture and impact mean to you to make that decision?
For me, it was about going into the cultures of the organization, because my master's degree was organizational behavior. And so when I went into both organizations to meet staff, to do the interviews, to dialogue, I'm also super, super highly observant. And so I'm watching everything. I'm like, okay, I'm digging this. They're treating me well. What is my life going to be like on the other side of this if I get the job? And then I look at the National Minority AIDS Council that was right here in DC, and it's like the culture there. Same thing. They're treating me well. They're kind. They're not offering major bucks. But what's the impact on the other side? And I was like, you know what? I need to take the social impact. I need to go with the organization where I'm going to wake up in the morning, and if I have to wake up at 4 a.m., I'm going to feel good about it. or, I'm going to go to bed at night knowing that the choices that I made for this organization are going to hopefully help other people. And I was like, as much as I love Nike, but they're corporate. And I knew the job that I was taking was not going to have a social impact. It was going to be about selling their product. And
how sick was your brother when you made that decision?
And my brother had already passed.
Okay.
And my younger brother was and I think a lot of it had to do with my family as well, because my family were very close. But my younger brother was in grad school himself. He was working on his master's at the time. And so he was switching medications and going through some stuff. My mom, even though she may not admit it, she'll admit like half of it, I think. She was going through some major depression. Like, she had gained lots of weight and her health was bad. And like, it was just like, she was not together. And, even like she wasn't even going to church, which is now her like saving grace right now. And then my father at the time he had already been diagnosed with cancer. So, I was like,
So you went for soul instead of money.
I went for soul instead of money.
Yeah, that wasn't easy because
that was not easy. Not at like 20 something.
Yeah. But I could understand. And there's one part of your brother's story, just to go back there for a second, that I didn't understand. You said something about him not taking his medication. What was that about? Like, I don't understand what that part was about.
Yeah. So when my brother was living in LA, he was practicing medicine. And so he had already graduated from med school from UCLA, and he was working in a hospital. And at the time when he stopped taking his meds, he was working in the emergency room. And at that period, the meds that were on the shelf and available for people to take were really, really harsh on people's bodies. Like, they were just as toxic and sometimes harmful as, the disease itself. Keeping your T cells low and whatnot, keeping your T cells high, like raising your T cells and keeping you healthy and vibrant and maybe keeping away some infection, they would just have so many other harmful effects to your body. Mm-hmm. And so my brother was having a hard time staying awake. And he also had a hard time focusing. And that was the result of his meds. Some of them were making him really groggy and just not fully coherent. Mm-hmm. And he told my mom and my dad, he was like, look, I worked this hard to practice medicine, and I'm making the choice to get off my meds so I can at least have some years of practicing medicine without disruption.
And did he get a couple years?
No, he got like a good year. Yeah, a good year.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry that, again, as we started, that just felt to me like a rough hand you got dealt, that he got dealt, you guys got dealt.
Yeah.
But what's amazing is, I know I've said this, that in my family, people go different ways when they face stuff like that. Like, sometimes it makes you stronger and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes, and the persevering after is what shapes us. For me, it seems like for you too. And so you powered on and you took this job working for this organization, national organization, marketing for them, right?
Yeah. And when what I did for them, I did a little community marketing, but I also had experience in grant writing. And so the woman that I was working for, she had created this department to support other nonprofits, like small local nonprofits. And so our job was one of my jobs was to go in, do a complete like organizational evaluation of their programming, of their services, and then provide them with like a strategic plan on how to take the next step. So it was kind of like designing, in this day and age, designing their social media platform, their social media brand. Basically, it was helping them to rebrand themselves or reshape who they were as an organization.
Right. All right. And so that was in D.C.
I was in D.C.
Why do you decide to come to New York and become a yoga teacher?
Yes, that's always the question. So doing the work that I was doing for them gave me the opportunity on one end to visit tons and tons of organizations throughout the U.S. Like just in my caseload, I probably had about 20 to 30 organizations that I would go and support through over a year. And then our team, there was probably like another 4 or 5 people. So we were like plugging into many different scenes within the HIV, AIDS, and sexual health realm throughout the United States. I met so many cool people. Like, it's so funny because like last weekend I talked on the phone with somebody that I worked with like 15, 20 years ago. You know, it's like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in the AIDS arena in so long. You know, they're like, I'm still fighting the fight, girl. You know, so I'm like, okay, I'm fighting on another end. But I saw people die. And it's like, you know, there was nothing worse than getting a call, not me personally, but getting a call to our organization because we were plugged in so deep within like communities of color, you know, within the AIDS arena. That was our focus. Getting a call, and then it would happen at least weekly. You get a call, they'll send an email out, or they'll make an announcement on the intercom, blah, 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 from so-and-so organization in Chicago, executive director died, or major funder died, or da-da-da-da. And I was like, I can't take it. I'm done. I was like, I'm done. And I went on vacation with my boyfriend for 2 weeks in Jamaica. It's always funny because I'm like, I went to Jamaica, I practiced yoga in Jamaica, and I came back and said, I'm out. And that's literally what I did.
What was that class in Jamaica like? Was that a Kundalini class?
You know, I don't even remember. I think we were just doing some down dogging, and just I needed the beach, and I needed nature, and I needed to
watermelon juice and some sun. And
that was my soul needed. So I went away, did that. I came back. I gave my 2 weeks notice, and my boss goes, you know, because at the time I'd been promoted to a director level, and she's like, you know, directors have to give a month notice. I was like, if I give a month, I'm not leaving. And she's like, serious? I was like, yeah, I'm not leaving. I said, but I will work another month to help transition, but I need to leave in 2 weeks. I need to be disconnected in 2 weeks. And I left and I moved to New York, and I spent another year in New York.
Why did you move to New York? What was the idea? What was the idea in your head to go there?
Well, the guy that I was visiting, or the guy that I went to Jamaica with, my boyfriend at the time, he was living in New York.
Okay.
And so, I mean, him and I had already had conversations about the job and like what I was experiencing. And he, you know, he would tell me from time, he's like, well, just come to New York and like hang out for a month or two and just like figure out what you want to do next, you know? Right. And that was the intention of just going there for a couple of months and then probably leaving or going somewhere else. So, you know, I had no intention of staying in New York. But I moved there and spent a year bouncing around to yoga studios. And
what was the year? Do you remember?
That definitely was like latter part of 2000, first of 2001-ish. Right.
Yeah. So there was the Shivananda Center, and there was the Iyengar Center.
I got,
and there was Shiva,
and then
there was still East West Books, and
Cindy
there was
Lee was there.
Yoga Zone. It wasn't Yoga Works yet.
It was Yoga Zone. Cindy Lee
had her Om Yoga. Had Om
Yoga. It was the cutest little spot.
That was that's when they all really started popping up everywhere. Mm-hmm. There was like a lot of centers happening right then.
Yeah. But one of my primary ones it's so funny. I also, because I lived on the east side, you know, there was that Crunch Gym that was right next to GP Mukti.
That's where Sharon David taught there, and Cindy Lee taught there. Like a lot of people taught that gym.
And that's what I learned about. That's what I practiced with Amy Ippoliti for the first time.
Yeah, she's on the podcast. We talked about that, and when she did her first training at Vira Yoga right when the Anya Sara thing kicked in.
Yeah. And so she taught at Crunch for a while.
Okay.
So,
all right. So, but then you end up landing at Laughing Lotus. What was it about Laughing Lotus that made it become your spot?
I landed at Lotus literally by chance. It was not in my circle of studios that I was doing for that first year. So the latter part of, it was like the latter part of 2001. And it was November 2001. And I go to Lotus, Baby Lotus on Columbus. Was it Columbus Street?
Baby Lotus? You mean, was there like another location, a smaller one?
Yeah. That's what they used to call it, like the Baby Lotus. This was way before the one they have now was open. That one wasn't open yet.
Okay.
This was like tiny spot. Like literally, I show up there in November because it was like Thanksgiving weekend or something like that, and my parents were like, you need to come home. And I was like, no, I can't afford it, blah, blah, blah. My mom was like, I'll fly you home. You know, my parents, they just wanted to see me. And I was like, nah, I'm going to stay in New York, you know. And I go online or something. Like, I don't know what happened, but I end up finding out that Lotus had a Thanksgiving yoga class. So I show up there for Thanksgiving on Thanksgiving Day. And of course, because, you know, I'm this broke chick trying to hang out on my savings in New York. And so,
which you could kind of do back then. I mean, there was a time when you could actually live in the city. I had an apartment for like $400 a month.
Yes.
You didn't need to make that much money. You could kind of live there.
Yeah, you could afford it. And I was living with my dude at the time. So, I mean, like, and he had an IT job. So, you know, I was literally just...
You were doing okay. You could hang out.
I was hanging out. I was doing exactly what he encouraged me to do, hang out.
Yeah.
So I go to Lotus on Thanksgiving, and I go to practice, and I was like, what is this?
Do you remember who was teaching?
Jasmine.
Nice. Because, you know, I never spent a lot of time there. I took like a couple classes there back when. But I think I took after, like, I don't remember that spot. It was the one they had after that, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah. The one after opened up in 2003, and that I was in the first class when that studio opened.
Well, I'm curious because you said you went to the class and you're like, this is it. And I'm curious what was about that. But my idea, and this is my guess, I'm going to guess because I just remember I practiced at Jiva Mukti, and then like I liked the certain aspect of it that was like this more serious-minded thing. But Dana sort of had that like, let's party vibe.
Yes, yeah. And which is interesting because Jasmine taught that day. Because Dana was there, but she didn't teach.
Okay.
Jasmine taught that day, and everything like that people feel about Lotus and like the music, the whole energetic vibe. Like it was an energetic class, but it was also very reverent, being Thanksgiving. And there was this just very sweet, and this is very much her, this very sweet, nurturing quality about the practice. But then you merged in like these Black gospel songs and then, Patty Davis playing on another track, like it was just like all these things. And it was like, oh my God, now Aretha's about to sing. I'm dying over here. I'm crying. Why are you making me cry? And I was thinking in my head, only my Kundalini makes me cry. Because that was really the only thing that would get me in that zone, in that space. And I was like, what is this? And so I was like, I'm coming back. And I kept coming back.
And I really feel like, to me, like what Dana and Jasmine did over there and are doing still, well, it's different now, but back then it felt to me like they were some of the people who really furthered this whole idea of vinyasa. Like we call it vinyasa like it's a style now, but
yeah.
Like Sharon and David first, they were like combining things, and they were coming out of like a performance background too. And they kind of created what I think of as that arc of a class.
Yes.
Where you're sitting at the beginning and whatever, and then you like start to get onto your hands and knees, and you get up and do sun salutations, and then maybe you go to the wall, then you come back and do back bends. and then maybe you forward bend and wind down to the rest or whatever, like as like a basic template of a vinyasa class.
Exact, the perfect vinyasa template. That's exactly it.
That's basically it, right? That they were doing that Summit Jivamukti, although they had a lot of, it was very esoteric in the early days. Like it wasn't the method yet. But that basic structure, they sort of started that. And then it seemed to me like people like Cindy Lee and Dana and Jasmine, they really kind of took that ball, kept it rolling, you know, and got more creative with sequencing, you know, and I guess more out of the box with music and stuff. I remember we used to DJ up those classes, something a lot. Like I remember playing like Led Zeppelin and Bob Marley and stuff, but I don't do that anymore. I'm like an old, like boring guy now. But back in the day, we used to really DJ. Do you still like DJ up your classes these days?
Yeah. So the other part of my life. Well, one, I've come from Louisiana, and you know, I've mentioned that I play piano and like
you say clarinet, right?
Clarinet,
like jazz clarinet.
Yeah, I wasn't that good though. My brothers, both saxophone players. Like we were a total woodwind family, but my brothers played saxophone so much better than me. So much better. And even I have a nephew who is the same thing. He's like such a talented musician, like can play like 5 instruments or something crazy like that. But music has always been just a huge part of our life. And growing up, my dad was all like serious 8-track in the car and like always had like some blues or jazz or like just something just fiery on, just meaning not firing like powerful, but like soulful and fiery in that sense, like, ooh, yeah. So music has always been a serious thing. So when I was in college, my undergrad, I had a minor in communications, and we had all these different classes. And one of my favorite classes was when we had to do like radio broadcasting. And so when I did that, I was like, I'm on the night shift because I've always been a night person. So I started DJing. I was like college DJ for like my one semester. So did that. That was totally fun. And then after that, I continued to just like dabble in music. Well, in another life, when I was in grad school, I got married while I was in grad school too. Like literally the same year that my brother died, I met my husband. And so he was a reggae DJ.
Okay.
So when I finally went to Lotus and was like, oh my God, this is how music can impact a vibration and in a physical practice like this. Because I grew up as a dancer, so music's always been this thing that I could hear and see and experience a movement based upon that track or that note. Like I could even like, when I'm creating a movement or something in dance class, I'm like, okay, no, that's where it needs to drop low. That's where it's high. That's, you know, that's where we're blah, blah, blah. And so when I saw how Dana and Jasmine and, you know, some of the other old school teachers at Lotus were like teaching and incorporating, and definitely Dana is like the master in that. Oh my God, it was all
about personal expression. Yes. People were like, I just remember even, I don't know, everybody was, it seemed less, yoga was less defined.
Yeah, less constrictive. And for me, that's what that was the other thing that drew me in. It was less constrictive. And I was like, you know what? I can be me. But also, I know, and this is like a totally different, this probably wasn't what you thought I was about to say, but I know within our current like yoga scene there, and it's very, very valid. I don't want to take anything away from this, but it's very, very valid where there are yoga classes very specific for people of color, or for African-American people to simply go and practice yoga with people that look like them.
And what makes you bring that up? Because I was thinking to ask you, like, what I don't remember a lot of Black people in yoga classes at that time.
Yeah, no, and there weren't. But I think for me, and I tell people my experience with this practice was very, very different. And a part of it, talking about how our childhood influences us, I did ballet growing up. And again, I was probably I think I had like 3 friends that, all of us were Black and we took ballet class together.
Yeah.
That was us. And
you
then
had a crew.
that was our crew, right? And then as I got older, the crew got smaller.
Yeah.
At different points in times when I was in a ballet company, I was like 1 or 2. There was myself and maybe one other guy. Yeah, because he was a senior dancer. It was myself and him. We were the only like Black, dancers in that ballet company. But I've always kind of like been in that scene where it's just me. So it's never ever made me feel uncomfortable. And a lot of it comes, I definitely put this on my parents. They always told us we can experience life in the way that we want. That's why they work hard. Like that was always their thing. That's why we do what we do, to make sure that you guys get everything you want to do and do what you want to do. We've got your back if you have problems, but don't forget that you are Black, which is hard enough to do, but don't make that your excuse why you're not going to do something. And so when I went into class at Lotus, I never felt excluded.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to me because I've always felt like, especially at that time, Manhattan was kind of this place where you could go and become whatever you wanted there.
Yes.
There was always somebody else who was into whatever you were into.
You were into.
And if you wanted to completely redefine yourself, like I completely redefined myself different than everybody else I grew up with.
Wow.
Like, but it's interesting because you can take the boy out of LA, but you can't take all the LA out of the boy. And I have to admit that to myself now, but I'm curious. So did you have 2 worlds? Did you have like your Black community and then your yoga community or not? Or at that time you were living in New York and it was all more integrated for you?
Yeah, for me it was, and it's weird because I grew up like that where there was some separation. But once I moved to the East Coast, I mean, even in DC, it started to merge a little bit because I was mostly hanging out with my coworkers, which was like always just a mixed crew because we worked in HIV and AIDS. So I mean, everything from gay, lesbian, Black, white, Hispanic, it didn't really matter.
Human causes transcend that shit.
Oh, definitely. And I think that even for me, that is what happened even in the yoga room for me, is that at that point in time in New York at Lotus, it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. Like we were all there wanting to be free, wanting to express.
Doing 108 sun salutations.
Right? I like chaturanga and our butts off, went into some oldies. Like, I don't know. Like it transcended.
It was a golden time. I've talked about that with other people on the podcast who were there. It was this really like kind of gilded time in the yoga world in Manhattan for sure.
Wow.
All right. So so after you do your teacher training, it's like 2000. Do you start teaching right away? That's right around 9/11, right?
Yeah. So I didn't start teaching until 2003. So I didn't do Lotus until 2003, even though I was practicing at Baby Lotus.
Oh, okay.
So I was in NewK around 9/11. So definitely that happened.
We have to raise that because anybody who was there when that happened, it was like a huge turn of life happened when that occurred.
It was heavy. Like, I mean, I don't think people realize, like, when you're like ground zero, like literally the city was ground zero. Like the entire, like Manhattan was
it was unreal. It was crazy. And I just remember, and I've said this before, I remember being in the subway. I was actually at the Omega Institute when it actually happened.
Oh, wow.
I was doing a core faculty yoga instructor gig, and I had 2 days left. I actually taught a class on that day, believe it or not. And then I got back. It was 2 days later. And it was just, I remember being on a subway platform and just like some total stranger standing there next to me. And we just looked at each other and we just started to cry and we like hugged each other.
Oh my God.
It was crazy, like I feel like even right now, just coming to that place in my mind, I get choked up because it was such a, like we've been talking about, it's those things that transcend the barriers, and this make you feel like we're just here together, Yeah. So, all right. So I noticed in your bio, though, that was also when your dad died.
Yes, that was the exact same year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So 9/11 happened, and then my dad died in November on his birthday. Like, it's just the most bizarre thing. Like, we call it a joke because that's kind of how my dad rolls.
Yeah.
But my dad was like kind of that person. Is
Just
like,
did that to fuck with your head, huh?
Yeah, I'd be like, really, dude? Really? You chose your date to go out, like,
Yeah.
So, but that was
all right. So, what was the decision? When did you think, I would like to teach?
So then, right after my dad passed, and I had mentioned that my younger brother was going through some medical stuff and switching some meds, and I decided, probably like about 7 or 8 months after that, to go and hang out with my brother. So I left New York just for probably maybe 4 months or something. Went to Arkansas to help my brother because he was actually he was working on his PhD at the time. At that time, he was done, or not. He was done with grad school and doing his PhD. And so I go there for a couple of months. And while I'm there, I meet this yoga teacher because, of course, I'm seeking out yoga everywhere I go. And we're in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and her name was Hamza, and she was an Iyengar teacher. And started practicing with her, hanging out with her and her family because they were just amazing, beautiful people, and they love music, reggae music as well. So hanging out with her, what hippie yogi doesn't. And during that time, just having conversations with her around, this practice. And, one day she was like, Faith, you would make a lovely teacher.
She put the seed in your head.
She did. Mm-hmm. And so I went back to New York and went over to Lotus and was like, yeah, I'm going to do this.
Let's do this. All right. So were you teaching by the time you were done?
So I was.
Yeah. I bet, because you were practicing for a long time. Back then, sometimes the teacher trainings were much more of an afterthought. You've been at it for some years. You probably knew how to do it.
And the weird part about it is even when I was in DC, now here's the crazy thing. Even when I was in DC and we were doing programming for the National Minority AIDS Council, I had already, because I taught conferences and workshops and stuff like that on a variety of other things. Mm-hmm. I had somehow convinced the executive director that, our people needed a relax and refuel workshop. And he was like, what does that include? I was like,
you didn't call it yoga. You're just
I was like, well, we're going to talk a little bit about, their stress. And then we're going to talk about how to deal with it. And then we're going to breathe and we're going to sit quietly. I didn't even call it meditation. I was saying, and then we're going to sit quietly. So I had started and he was like, well, who's going to do that? You? And I was like, yeah, I can do that, And so I was teaching breath work and, meditation basically first.
Yeah.
Before I became a teacher.
Yeah. I taught for almost 2 years before I did teacher training. You just were practicing and you kind of did it.
You just did it. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So you were already teaching a little, you already had a comfortability taking on that role, which I think is one of the big obstacles that sometimes teacher trainings help people with. But if you don't have that obstacle, then as I guessed and you confirmed, you kind of funneled in pretty quick. Were you teaching at Laughing Lotus?
Yeah. So I had a class at Lotus. And I took over one of Dana's classes at Crunch because she didn't want to teach there anymore. So
that's a big class, right?
That was huge. I was like, really? This is what I'm going to do? I auditioned, of course, at Crunch, and there was 200 people in the room, and I was one of 5 people or something like that. Yeah. So once I got that, then, a couple of weeks later, I was like, Dana's like, yeah, you're going to be teaching the class I'm giving up at Crunch. I'm like, okay.
Nice, good gig. And,
It was.
Again, that time there was a lot of opportunities.
Lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
I was definitely one of those teachers, that did the 15 or so yoga classes a week mixed up with privates and, bouncing around the city like crazy.
Yeah, you were working it. And
I was working it.
Were you coming up against the issue of race at that time as a teacher? Did you? Because I've had other people speak about that where they walk in and there's no other black people in their class. They're always teaching all white people, and that sort of becomes an issue for them.
Now that definitely happened. I mean, that was a regular, and it wasn't something that I was annoyed by, because I knew that there were other people of color, practicing yoga. I knew there were other black people practicing. I just didn't know what they were. I would see them from time to time. You'll see a couple rolling through Lotus from here and there and here and there. And I had like in my graduating class at Lotus, it's myself and one other black woman that was in the class. But you would see people from time to time, and I would say.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.